fortified by decades of technological developments. Breakthroughs, advances, modernizations, and research and development have led to immense opportunity and improved and enriched lives. The industry is always inventing and is committed to advancements and innovation that is protecting and improving the environment and allowing people across the globe to live longer, more prosperous, and productive lives. The industry's innovation and ingenuity, coupled with a commitment to research and development and rooted in technological advancements, has changed the world. And for 100 years, the Texas oil and natural gas industry has led the way.
The story of Texas is one of grit, guts, and glory. And the same can be said about the industry that has defined the Lone Star State, oil and natural gas. This proud history is on display at the Bullock Texas State History Museum's newly renovated and expanded exhibit.
Good morning, everyone.
Texas Oil and Gas.
We're going to get started in just a few minutes.
Visitors are invited to explore the past, present, and future.
We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. If you'll please take your seats. Thank you.
Transportation won world wars and makes modern life possible here and across the globe. Explore the processes, people, prosperity, and potential. Experience interactive exhibits to see firsthand how Texas is at the forefront of oil and natural gas technology that is changing the world. Discover the cutting-edge scientific innovation, economic impact, and environmental evolution of the industry. While viewing a working pump jack and a floor-to-ceiling wall of everyday products made from oil and natural gas. For an engaging, educational, interactive experience, visit Texas Oil and Gas at the Bullock Texas State History Museum.
When I grow up, I want to change the world. And Texas Oil and Natural Gas is fueling my future. The industry is committed to STEM education, supporting teachers, and making sure Texas students like me are prepared for the future.
The mobile oil field learning unit visited us, so students got to rotate through 24 stations where they got to learn about everything having to do with the oil industry.
Fueling technology. Fueling education, fueling jobs. Texas Oil and Natural Gas, funding STEM education, fueling my future.
What does it mean to be an employee of the energy industry? It means hard work, dedication, and ingenuity. It means utilizing the latest innovative technologies. It means proudly serving the industry that's defined Texas over the last 100 years. Our industry has fueled our past, and Texans can count on us to fuel our next 100 years. We work because we care about Texas, our nation, and our world. And we're committed to building a better future. Excellence is our standard. Safety, security, and science are at our core. Over 100 years of excellence, ingenuity, and innovation. And we are always looking for ways to improve. Because this is our economy, our environment, and our future too.
Good morning and welcome to Texas Energy Day at the Capitol 2021.
And members, I rise today to recognize and celebrate virtual Texas Energy Day at the state capitol.
I don't think the average legislator knows how far and how hard the industry is working.
You provide funding for our schools, for our roads, for our economy. You create jobs. You add so much to the state of Texas.
Someone said, well, how do you feel about the oil and gas industry? What do you mean how I feel about this? It is Texas. It is America. It gives us our independence.
The energy, oil and gas industry of Texas has, since the turn of the century, saved and revolutionized and made a safer, cleaner, better world in every regard.
Your voices are crucial to ensuring the health of our energy industry, which ultimately ensures the strength of the Texas economy.
To be with you, we're here live on Energy Avenue where we have the food trucks.
Thank you for braving bad conditions, getting out there physically, and getting things up and running for our state.
I don't think there's ever been this much concentrated focus on innovation across the whole spectrum of the energy industry.
No matter where you live in Texas, the oil and natural gas industry benefits you. And I want us to go out and represent Texas energy all across Texas.
They say every new day is a new opportunity to be a little better than the day before. In these challenging times, we have been reminded what matters.
Good morning, everyone. If everyone could take their seats, that would be great, so we can get started. I know we're running a little bit behind, but we'll call it a rain delay, okay? Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today at the TXOGA Tech Showcase here as part of the 2021 Lone Star Energy Forum. My name is Shayna Joyce, and I'm Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for TXOGA. And I'm also a proud member of the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition, who is a proud partner of today's showcase. The Texas Oil and Gas Association, also known as TXOGA, is a statewide trade association representing every facet of the Texas oil and gas industry, including small independents and major producers. Collectively, the membership of TXOGA produces in excess of 80% of Texas's crude oil and natural gas. It operates over 80% of the state's refining capacity and is responsible for a vast majority of the state's pipelines. And today's proud partner of the TXOGA Tech Showcase, the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition, was created in December 2019 to better assess the issues of methane emissions and flaring and develop industry-led solutions for Texas. Nearly 2 years later, it has grown to include 7 trade associations and over 40 operators. And we continue to collectively identify and promote operational and environmental recommended practices to minimize flaring and methane emissions. So today, we will hear from companies offering a variety of cutting-edge solutions and technologies available to the today's oil and natural gas industry that reduce emissions, provide operational efficiencies, and so much more. Now, before we get started, because our general counsel is here, we must go over the antitrust statement. We will be hearing from different companies, and per TXOGA policy, we will not be discussing any prices or any other topic of competition prohibited by antitrust laws. And we will also be sticking to agenda. If we get off our agenda any time, we'll come back and get right back at the topics at hand. Now, before we get started, I wanted to introduce our special expert panel today that will be helping to evaluate our technologies. Today, we are privileged to have with us Max Gagliardi of Talk Energy Podcast and co-founder of Encova Energy, and Jake Corley, who's co-founder of Digital Wildcatters. Both of these gentlemen are deeply involved with the oil and natural gas industry and the technology industry that is developing to produce energy that fuels modern life in a cleaner, better way. So Max and Jake, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Can everyone give them a hand? So come on up here and say a few words to everybody before we get started.
You want to start? Yeah, I'll go for it. Max Gagliardi. I just want to say thanks to TXOGA for having me out. And you guys do a bunch of great work. And I'm especially excited to be a part of something to do with technology. And this industry's changed in the last 10 years. I've been able to see the technologies evolve. And it's just always amazing to see what people come up with and how things change. And also, I just want to say good luck to the presenters. I know it takes a lot of work to put these presentations together. And it's not always easy to get up and to talk about your baby and to talk about what you do every day and what you're passionate about. And so I know you're all going to crush it. So good luck.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks, TXOGA. Prior to Digital Wildcatters, I actually came into the industry as a tech founder. So I got out of the Marine Corps, dropped out of college, and started my first business in oil and gas and knew nothing about the industry. So building software for operators and then kind of rinsed and repeated a few different times. So I understand how you guys feel about your babies and know most of you personally as well. So super excited to see the presentations. Thanks again for TXOGA. There's never been a more exciting time to kind of be an energy tech. Just having been in this space for the last decade, I think especially because of 2020, you see more and more people take severance packages, they're laid off, and they're reinvesting into themselves and kind of taking those leaps. So we're seeing more technologies pop up every single day. We're talking about on the podcast and with our events and things like that. So super excited to be here. Super excited to keep talking about technology.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll definitely hear more from y'all later, so thank you so much for being here today. Now, we do have a few prizes today, and the audience will help us with one of them. You will be able to vote for your audience favorite award, and we'll be able to do that right from your phone. Don't worry about any of the technology and questions and all of that now. We'll have a slide at the end of the presentations to help you vote. And then we will also have our expert panel pick the most innovative technology award. So We have agendas. If you didn't grab one, we can bring some in, but we left some space for some notes if you want to take those as well. One last housekeeping item is we're hoping to have time for Q&A for each of the presenters today. So if you have a question, there are some TXOGA notepads right there. You can write down the question, hold it up, and we'll have TXOGA staff grab that for you so that we can get your question answered. So we're going a little bit out of order today. We're going to start with Source Energy. So we have Josh Adler here today, founder and CEO of Source Energy. And Josh, why don't you come to the stage? And I'll tell you a little bit more about Source Energy. It's a technology leader in geospatial upstream energy intelligence with an unmatched expertise in applying AI to satellite imagery, GPS tracking, and regulatory big data for holistic insights to the upstream energy activity. Josh, thank you for going first. We appreciate it. You get a few extra minutes, and we'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shanna. I'd like to think they put me first because that's what was going to get everybody to fight the rain and get in here early because you don't want to miss it. In reality, I just kind of lucked into showing up first. Whether it's lucky or not, we'll see how many people kind of roll in as they fight the Dallas traffic. And I want to say I'm grateful to TXOGA for inviting us here, and not only because it's a great honor to appear in front of y'all, but because if I weren't here last night, hanging out with a great bunch of people, I probably would have splurged for one of those World Series tickets and would have gone to that Astros game and would have been very bitter about whatever it is I spent for it this morning. So it all worked out really well for us. I'm Josh Adler. I'm the founder of what is now Source Energy. And in what I'd like to think is an even bigger announcement than the World Series results this week, just this week, we actually renamed the company Source Energy. So if you haven't heard of us before, well, hopefully you've all heard of Source Water before, which is the company that we started about 8 years ago. If you haven't, you can at least pretend that you did. And now you're definitely all going to have heard about Source Energy. So you're not going to be able to miss it this time. So Source Water is now Source Energy. And this presentation, you're going to see why. What Source Energy does is we're pioneering energy intelligence with artificial intelligence, satellites, mobile GPS data, and a lot of other data that I'm going to tell you about. So first I'm going to describe a little bit about what we do. I'm going to talk about some of the new technologies just in the last few years that have enabled us to do what we do. And then I'm going to show you a few of the things we do, including using satellite imagery to predict drilling and completion plans in advance of any permits, showing you how we can do real-time tracking of frac crews and even individual truckloads of proppant and crude and water using something we call Fracscape. And then I'm going to take a minute to leave you with something in the ESG spotlight, which is induced seismicity, which happens to be something that we specialize in. So Source Energy strives to be the leader, the technology leader in geospatial energy intelligence. We started the company beginning of 2014 as a spin-out from MIT's Energy Ventures program. We've had 14 U.S. patents granted, and we have over 12 pending for geospatial energy intelligence methods. We've got some of the top E&Ps, oilfield service, and minerals investment companies as clients. But if you haven't heard of it, the reason is because of the kind of endorsements we get from our clients. So this is a real one. Leading mineral investor, quote, "We like the edge Source Energy gives us over our competitors, so we're not out recommending it." With friends like these, it gets stuck with me to have to toot our own horn to y'all because no one else wants to tell you where they get their edge from, but it's us. So what we do is we combine omni-channel data sources, a lot of different kinds of data, which really differentiates us from other kinds of energy intelligence companies. Traditionally, energy intelligence is basically permit scraping, right? That's what it's been for the last 60 years. And we do that. We do regulatory data for oil, gas, water disposal, and we're starting to get into regulatory data for solar, wind, hydro, and carbon. We also gather marketplace intel. We have geoscience models, particularly around saltwater disposal and induced seismicity. We gather data from the internet, from non-regulatory sources, such as we have a patent on scraping public legal notices to map them to show future drilling plans in advance of permits. And what really differentiates us is the technology we've developed around satellite imagery analysis and mobile GPS tracking. And we put these all together in a series of different data as a service or software as a service product lines. So those 5 lines include Source Energy GIS, which is all your general oil, gas, water disposal, land information in a GIS platform with a lot of GIS tools for planning. We have Source Water Pro, which is probably our most widely used platform, which shows oil field water movements from the frac pond to the frac to recycling to the pipeline or truck to the disposal on the surface and in the subsurface. So we're showing where all the produced water comes and goes from and to on the surface and the subsurface. That's actually what you're seeing in the video right now, showing the water movements between disposals and producing leases in Texas. Source Water Geo is a new geoscience platform we developed that is the only geoscience platform specifically focused on understanding, assessing, and avoiding induced seismicity risk in saltwater disposal. And we show all the over 3,000 geologic fault lines, fault slip potentials, where the water is really being injected, the pressure levels, the volumes. Dirt Work Alert uses satellite imagery to detect drilling and completion plans on the ground with AI in advance of permit filings and with more predictivity than permit filings. And then Fracscape is our newest, which is real-time pinpoint tracking of frac crews, ducts, and trucks with analytics. So first, what is energy intelligence? Well, generally speaking, it's other people's assets and actions. You're always going to know what you're doing in your own business a lot better than we ever will, I hope. But where we help you is understanding what everybody else is doing, whether it's a transaction you're looking to do, acquiring an asset or selling an asset, or whether it's you want to look at competitor activity, asset valuations, cost benchmarking, seeing how others are doing. And one that's become a really big one, of course, is ESG performance relatively and your risk and your impact. And the problem today is that conventional energy intelligence doesn't really work anymore. And we all know what these methods are, right? There's word of mouth, drilling permits and production scraped from the Railroad Commission, rig tracking, which has been around for a long time, and courthouse records. All of these, first of all, there's no edge in any of them because everyone does them. Also, there's a lot of errors in permits and word of mouth. Everybody's got some bias. There's some reason why they're telling you what they're telling you. And even with rig tracking, which is timely and accurate and has been around for a while, it just doesn't tell you very much in the unconventional era. I mean, it used to be that when you drilled a well, there was production. Today, you drill a well and there's a duck. It's really the completions that you need to know about. And what we've done is taken advantage of new technologies that only became available really in the last 5 years to create a completely new method of developing and delivering energy intelligence. We take advantage of advances in cloud computing, unlimited storage, and processing power practically for free these days from organizations like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft. We take advantage of advances in remote sensing, which include distributed sensors, satellite imagery of many different kinds. The number of satellites in orbit has tripled in the last 5 years. You couldn't do these things 5 years ago. Now they're almost free. And mobile location data. Every single phone out there is being tracked. Sorry if I'm breaking any news to you, which provides incredible information about what's happening in supply chains. And then there's so much data that you could never take advantage of it if it weren't for the availability now of artificial intelligence, and particularly something called deep learning, which has only really been available since 2015, and today is better at identifying objects in pictures than people are. And by the way, when you're clicking to prove you're not a robot on the internet, and you're trying to pick, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a cat, that was a dog. What you're actually doing is you're training those AI systems for free, and all that information from millions of people is going back to them to help them identify what traffic lights look like and what bridges look like and all those things you're always clicking on. So we put all these together to provide a new kind of energy intelligence. Now first, how do we get into that? Well, the reason is, way back when our company was called Source Water last week, good 6-7 years ago, we were trying to find all the frac ponds in Texas because that was a key part of the upstream supply chain. We were trying to find all the water. And what we realized was there's actually really no permit data at all about the locations and size and water type of frac ponds. So how are we going to find them? Because at Source Water, the one thing we had to have was frac ponds, right? And what we realized was we might be able to see squares of water in the desert from space. And these types of satellites had just newly become available in 2016, 2017. And so we started building these deep learning systems to look at imagery like this and try to find those frac ponds on the ground. And we were looking at imagery exactly like this, and you see frac ponds showing up here. But what we also realized was there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens on the ground in the Permian Basin that never shows up in regulatory data, like frac ponds, like well pads, like lease roads, or that shows up so late, a year later or never, that it's just not that useful by the time it comes out, like frac crew locations, initial production, rig crew locations. And so we started building these systems using something called convolutional neural nets to understand what's happening in the satellite imagery and report that in our intelligence. And we found that we are able to identify these things pretty consistently. And we turned that into a product called Dirt Work Alert that we launched kind of at an unfortunate time, I think in March of last year. But things are picking up for it now for sure. And what it lets you do is see drilling plans in advance of permits and completion plans in advance of permits all across the entire Permian Basin. We're expanding it to other areas. And so one of the things you see from this is economic indicators that aren't available from any other source. So what you're seeing here is about a year and a half from beginning of 2020. And on the right side, you see those lines shooting up. What those lines represent are actually, the biggest one there is well pad construction. And the one below it is frac pond construction. And then you see a little lagging under it is drilling permit filings. So we really are predicting these events in advance. Basically, well pads have to get built before you drill a well, and frac ponds have to get built before you can frac a well. And what we found in a very detailed study that we conducted last year with a researcher at Rice University was that in about a quarter of cases, the well pad is built in advance of even the very first submission of a drilling permit filing. Now, there's nothing wrong with that from a regulatory standpoint, but the point is that it lets you consistently predict a portion of market activity before any other source. And here's an example of that, because sometimes people don't believe us. Here's an XTO pad, actually 2 XTO pads, that were built clearly in advance of the initial submission of the drilling permits by about 5 days. And the way that that looks in the platform is every single day, we're alerting you to any new well pads that have appeared that weren't there before. And we're comparing them to whether there's any drilling permits around there so that we can alert you just to the ones that showed up that don't have a permit yet. But the interesting thing here is, I'd say, trust but verify, not to quote anybody, which is we show you where all these things are, but then we actually let you see for yourself and decide whether you want to act on it. Because we've created something called Time Machine that runs the clock back 2 years for any place actually on Earth that you want to look. And you can see this video of every single week what happened in that spot that you've selected in optical imagery, in infrared, which makes the water pop out, and in SAR imagery, which I'm going to explain in a minute, but makes the metal and the equipment pop out. And so you can see for yourself, oh yeah, I can see the well pads getting built. I can see the rights of way getting built. I can see the reserve pit filling up with water. I know a rig's on the way. This is definitely a real well pad. This is something that I want to act on. And by the way, if you're still using Google Earth to see what's happening on the ground, you're going to lose every time, because the Google Earth imagery, especially of remote areas like in West Texas, is often more than a year out of date. Sometimes it's multiple years out of date. And here's a Google Earth image of that exact spot on the ground 2 months after we identified the well pad. There is nothing there. You really can't stay abreast of the market with Google Earth. But there's another really powerful benefit to tracking drilling permits and some of these other features, which is it's not just about ground game, getting new deals first for a mineral investor or for an oilfield service company. Seeing more detail about what's really on the pad gives you better understanding of what's on the lease, and it allows you to make better predictions about when production and other events are going to happen. And this is critical for bigger minerals companies and other asset type investors, because a lot of permits never get drilled. But a permit that costs $200 that gets a pad that costs $200,000 is very likely to get drilled, and it's going to get drilled a lot sooner. And so you're going to make much better allocation decisions with your resources if you have better information and better predictions about who is really moving forward on a project and what's just kind of a false flag because they threw in 100 permits at a time because the guy was in Austin that day. And we saw during COVID that actually permits get drilled even, there's even a bigger spread now between permits with pads versus permits without pads and which ones get drilled sooner. Another key element is that the pad sizes correlate very highly to the future number of wells that will be drilled on those pads. So you're getting a much better earlier prediction of future production and future activity on the site by looking at the well pad sizes, which are not available from any other source. So now I'm going to talk a little about Fracscape and then leave you with some things on induced seismicity. Because for us, really, the holy grail for real-time intelligence has always been tracking completions. Rigs have been tracked for a long time, but no one was able to track the frac crews. And today, it's not just about the water market, which is, of course, 100% about completions, and the proppant market, which is only about completions and disposal, but actually, spending on completions is more than double the spending on drilling now. So we're really talking about the whole oil field services space, and more than 90% of all new wells are unconventional wells. So we really don't understand anything about what's going on unless we can track completions in near real time. So could we go duck hunting? Well, what we did is we figured out how to do it. So first, we know that a pad with a permit and a rig means there's a duck there as of the time that the rig leaves. And so we're able to identify that using the satellite imagery and the regulatory data. Then we use a different type of satellite imagery called synthetic aperture radar, which cuts through clouds and bounces off of metal. On the left side, what you're seeing there is optical imagery that's repeatedly blocked by cloud cover. On the right side, you're seeing the SAR imagery, which shows the equipment on the site through the cloud cover. But sometimes seeing the equipment doesn't tell you what kind of equipment it is. So what we've also done is added in anonymous cell phone tracking data licensed from multiple aggregated sources to figure out what kind of crew it is. Is this a rig crew? Is this a frac crew? Are these set up and take down people? Is it coil tubing? Is it bulldozing? Is it artificial lift? We're able to see what kind of people are on the site and where they came from and where they go. We don't know their names, we don't know their phone numbers, but we know that they parked those trucks in a Halliburton yard. So now we know who they work for, and we know which operators they're going to work for. And we've mapped thousands of locations throughout the Permian to be able to identify who works for whom and where those crews are and who they work for. And those are updating typically within 1 to 3 days of really being on the site. And we put that all together and created something called Fracscape for daily pinpoint frac, rig, and duct tracking with the crews identified. And of course, there's a lot of value to doing real-time tracking. These are where the fracs happened throughout the last year and a half, and we're able to identify these as they happen and who they work for. And in fact, using these same methods, we're able to identify individual truckloads of proppant, sand, and crude by using similar methods, say geofencing all of the sand mines. Anybody who visits a sand mine twice is probably a sand truck driver, right? So now we can see, for example, in this real example from September 20th, 2020, that EOG is getting ready to frack some wells in New Mexico there, because we can see that they're starting to stockpile the sand, and the frac crew isn't even there yet. And now we know it's going to come after that. By the way, proppant is also very highly correlated to initial production. So if we know the proppant load, we have a pretty good idea of how much oil those wells are going to produce, which isn't going to get reported for probably a year and a half from now. And then another benefit of this is we've surveyed folks and found that the average oil field worker spends 30 minutes a day lost on lease roads. Imagine the amount of non-productive time, the amount of surface impacts and needless emissions from people driving around lost on dirt roads. We're able to actually map those roads and make them into navigational vectors using a combination of the satellite imagery and the mobile tracking. So the very last thing I'm going to talk about, because it's just such a hot topic, I couldn't leave it alone, is induced seismicity. So first, I would say we have a view that there's 6 key ESG metrics for upstream energy. You've got methane emissions, which is what everybody talks about all the time. You've got flaring. You've got water recycling, which we have a little bit of information about. You have surface transport impacts, emissions, and surface impacts generally. There's carbon capture and storage, which is its own thing that we'll talk about another time. But one of the biggies is induced seismicity risk. And if you haven't seen a chart like this, you need to. This is from the University of Texas, from TexNet, Center for Induced Seismicity Research, where our head of geoscience was one of the principal investigators, and we brought her over a couple years ago. This is cumulative earthquakes greater than 3.0 magnitude in West Texas shown on here. You see it's climbing up a wall. It's shooting up. And we saw similar things in Oklahoma a few years ago. Now it's happening in West Texas. And so what you see in our platform is we've heat mapped these events. We're getting them every single day. On the left side there, you're seeing earthquakes of greater than 2.0 magnitude, climbing up a wall there, shooting up. And for the first time ever, the Railroad Commission just 6 weeks ago started to take some action about this to try to tamp down volumes and pressures of disposal in what they're calling seismic response areas. They created one called Gardendale around Midland and Odessa. They just created a second one about a week ago around Culberson and Reeves. This is a really big deal for the industry because it's not just about cutting back the volumes going into disposal wells. If you can't get rid of that water, and remember in West Texas, especially the Delaware Basin, you're looking at 8 or 10 to 1 ratios of produced water to produced oil. You can't produce that oil if you can't get rid of the water, do something with it. And yes, there should be a lot more recycling, and that's one of the things that comes out of this. But even if we recycle, even if we only used 100% recycled water in every frac, we'd still probably have about 80% of the produced water that's got to go somewhere. And so it's become much more strategic about where can you and should you send that water. And you need to understand that risk, not just in your own assets, but throughout your supply chain for where is that induced seismicity risk where your water is going. And so the very last thing I'll show you is our platform Source Water Geo, where we're putting together daily seismic events, all the SRAs. We've mapped over 3,000 geologic fault lines in 3D in the Permian Basin, mostly with their fault slip potentials. We've got the injection pressures and volumes. We use the Railroad Commission algorithms to flag for seismic risk, and you're able to trace the water supply chain to see for every disposal which producing lease did the water come from. And that allows you to basically find and avoid induced seismicity risk that may be hidden in your supply chain. So I won't cover all these things, but needless to say, operators, oilfield service companies, investors and analysts, and especially mineral investors these days can all get a lot of benefit from the kinds of intelligence that we're able to provide, and I look forward to talking to you about it. Thank you very much.
Josh, I think we have time for one question. Do you want to play rock, paper, scissors for it, or? I think Jake is going to talk. Can we turn up his mic? Thanks.
Testing. There we go. Josh, I've had you on the podcast like 3 times, so it's hard for me to think of questions. So I'm trying to think as the audience, do you guys compete with Enverus formerly Drilling Info? If yes, how so? If no, how? Like, do you complement them? How does it work together? Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I hesitate to say too much about a competitor. One, because I don't want to represent anything that they're doing, because who knows? I'm not their customer. We do very often get compared to Enverus, particularly for companies that have a water focus to their business, essentially because what we're told is everything that they do that matters for a water-oriented business, we also do, but then we do a lot of things related to water intelligence that they definitely don't do. But probably more significantly these days is the advances we've been making in the satellite imagery and mobile data intelligence. They acquired a company called RS Energy last year that does some of this, not all of it, not exactly the same. I'd encourage people to actually compare them, because we are definitely getting people switching, including some bigger companies. And so, we do encourage that comparison. And I would say the most important thing is we're a really small company, and so we very actively listen to our customers and try to build things quickly that are directly responsive to what we're asked for, because we're trying to find that fit and those niches that aren't already covered. So that's something you probably won't get as much from a company that has 10,000 accounts. But for us, each customer matters a lot, and so we really try to actually kind of custom build our system to answer the questions that the customer is saying that they need us to answer with the intelligence.
So with the rebrand, if I may really quickly, where do you see Source Energy in the next 3 years?
The IPO, $10 billion market cap, no. That'd be great, but that's all right. I definitely think that we're able to provide intelligence for the energy transition in a way that no one's ever done yet. And so particularly for upstream, I showed that chart with the 6 different factors. Each one of those, we have really interesting insight on. Of course, everybody's doing methane, and those satellites are available to everybody, and we can pull them in just like the other companies. But some of these things are very different, like water recycling, carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture Class 6 UIC wells are almost exactly like Class 2 UIC disposal wells. And we've built out this whole system just for understanding capacity and risk for disposal wells. That's pretty easy to port over to carbon capture wells. So I think that's an important one too. I think we can kind of be able to wrap everything up in a really nice package that allows companies to understand where they stand in terms of those ESG metrics, be able to do that on a relative basis and a more transparent basis. And that's definitely where I see us kind of, building off of this base.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much, Hannah.
One thing I failed to mention is we are live streaming on the TXOGA YouTube page. So hello, everyone in the live stream. I know that I've seen some tweets about it, so thank you, everyone, for promoting that. Now we will hear from Robin Lane, who is co-founder and CEO of Transect. And Robin will make her way up to the stage. And Robin is a former environmental consultant who founded Transect in 2016 out of a realization that the desktop environmental research conducted as part of her client's due diligence was inefficient. So 5 years later, Transect is available in all 50 states and with a continued mission to making environmental due diligence easy. So thank you so much for being here, Robin. Let's give Robin a hand.
Haven't even said anything yet. This is on. Y'all hear me? Okay, great. Haven't even said anything yet. You don't have to clap for me quite yet. All right, my name is Robin Lane. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Transect. Big thanks to TXOGA for inviting us to be here today. Very excited to present. So every pipeline, every well, every facility that you guys have built or bought or maintained has a folder. And that folder might be fat or that folder might be thin, but that folder has the word environmental on it. And that's because every well and pipeline and facility that is built on U.S. land. And that U.S. land has things like endangered species and wetlands and sensitive ecosystems and populations that are on it. And if you build on those kinds of things, that triggers all sorts of environmental regulations, things like the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, NEPA, those kinds of things, not to mention all of the state and local regulations that are triggered by those. So you probably paid, or someone on your team paid an environmental consultant to put together said aforementioned folder with maps and PDFs and surveys and all sorts of permit documents so you could prove to the world that you did your environmental compliance. So true confession, I was one of those environmental consultants. Hiking boots, snake guards, billable hours, permit, binders full of NEPA documents, the whole shebang. And, and if you've ever bid out any of this kind of work on your end, you know that our processes are pretty inefficient. Our research is repetitive. We sometimes do a bit more field work than we need to. We copy and paste a lot of reports. Again, this is all true confession. And so after more than a decade in that industry, I left my position as National Program Manager of the Natural Resources Department at a big consulting firm, and I left to start Transect. And we are on a mission. We are an online software that is solving problems around the environmental compliance space, automating environmental compliance solutions. And we started with the due diligence process, which is what I'm here to talk with you about today. The green button? Okay, great. So environmental due diligence is a pretty big term of art that can cover a lot of regulatory territory, but it means something unique to us. When I say environmental, I'm talking about sensitive plants, animals, waterways, cultural resources, lands, all sorts of stuff. Our natural resources, things that occur in our natural world. And of course, you guys are no stranger to the word due diligence, defined as reasonable steps taken to satisfy a legal requirement. So what does this mean, and why is it important to you? So to answer that, let's go back in time. Back to 2011, when then Texas Land Commissioner Jerry Patterson announced that he had a new health diagnosis for the state of Texas. That's right, we had reptile dysfunction. At that time, U.S. Fish and Wildlife was listing the dune sagebrush lizard as a protected species under the Endangered Species Act. It's in the Permian Basin. Created some pretty big concerns over land use and jobs and domestic energy production. That species did get listed, but the comptroller came up with a really great conservation plan. And thanks to the industry, you guys participating in that plan, we actually got that species delisted. It was amazing. We all took a big sigh of relief, like temporarily, because now that species is under review again. We've got a new plan, a new conservation plan out and about. So thus is kind of the never-ending cycle of the natural resources issues that you guys are facing. So back to our question, what is environmental due diligence and why does it matter to you? Because in addition to issues like the dune sagebrush lizard, there are hundreds of other of these same kinds of issues that directly affect your industry. Things like streams and wetlands, the changing regulatory status of those streams and wetlands, floodplains, protected areas, cultural resources, local setbacks, other threatened and endangered species, changes to federal, state, and local regulations, timelines, blah, on and on. So these are issues that have big impacts on your project success and things that you need to know how to de-risk for and solve for. I was just talking to a Transect customer the other day who used to be one of my clients back in the day. It's a midstream pipeline company. He said to me, remember that time that I forgot to call you and I went ahead and planned my center line and there was some like crazy esoteric protected area I didn't know about and it definitely delayed my project by 9 months? Yeah, that really sucked. I said, yeah, that did suck. But that's exactly why I started Transect. So that guys like him and others in the industry can get their due diligence in minutes. No more surprises, no more waiting on information, no more fingers crossed, really being able to de-risk those projects. Okay, so speaking of Oklahoma, And because I've got an American burying beetle on this slide, that's the little black and red guy on the side, I'm going to take a moment to tell you my really bad joke. Okay, so for those of you who don't know an American burying beetle, it's a little carrion beetle. He buries roadkill in eastern Oklahoma. He has babies on it. They eat it. It's a protected species and has been a big problem for the oil and gas industry in eastern Oklahoma for a long time. So not super related, but I'm going to tell it anyways. So what did the dung beetle say when he walked into a bar? Okay, is this stool taken? Okay. I know, it's really bad. Is it weird to tell a poop joke? I don't know. I did it. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Killed before the pandemic. I'm glad it still does. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about how we can actually help with some of your environmental due diligence problems. So let's start with our flagship product, Transect Reports. So with reports, our oil and gas customers get environmental due diligence in minutes instead of weeks or months, as with traditional consulting methods. Just a couple of minutes, a Transect report gives you all of the important information, data, maps, yes, but we also give you all the regulations, permits, timelines, costs, next steps you need to know to de-risk any project across the nation. So yes, it has a map, but data on a map is pretty useless unless you know what it means for your project footprint, budget, and timeline. We've got decades of automated consulting intelligence in our reports built on and around hundreds of environmental, regulatory, and infrastructure data sets. You can customize it, you can share it, you can PDF it, you can make your own custom maps. A Transect report truly is a complete due diligence checklist at your fingertips. Moving on to our next tool, I'm guessing you don't always want to view environmental data just on a project site. Maybe you haven't chosen your next project site or your next project route. You want to look at environmental data across lots of counties, lots of states. For this, we have our product called Vision. Vision is an easy-to-use mapping tool that's pre-populated with a bunch of essential environmental, land, and infrastructure data that's important to you so that you can explore data without the burden of expensive or inadequate mapping tools or delays caused by maybe your internal, external data gatekeepers. But Vision is so much more than just a pretty face, just a pretty map. It has some really cool features, too. The first is our Site Finder, which appeals particularly to like our right-of-way and land teams who are trying to find land to build on. Our Site Finder filters through thousands of land parcels to highlight the ones that meet your specific buildable criteria. Maybe you're looking for a certain number of acres, you're looking for flat land, you're looking to avoid all floodplains. Whatever kind of your heart's desire is, Site Finder can find those for you in just a few clicks. Another Vision feature I want to highlight is our developable area tool. On a piece of land or along a pipeline route, you may want to see the specific areas that are more tricky to develop on than others, maybe areas of steep slopes, railroads, protected lands, things with kind of tricky regulatory requirements. Our developable tool is basically a heat map, a custom heat map that will show you where those tricky areas are, maybe areas where you want to open cut versus areas where you want to bore. Lastly, and this is definitely in the spirit of the Halloween candy, I know y'all are all sneaking from your kids late at night, I want to introduce our Ghost Waters feature. This is actually a brand new feature. We just launched it, or we're just getting ready to launch it publicly in a few weeks. What are Ghost Waters? It's a term that we coined at Transect that are water bodies that are in the field, but that are not on any data set anywhere. Based on the thousands of miles of pipelines that I have walked, that my team has walked, we would estimate about 25% of the waters that we have found are not mapped anywhere. Oftentimes, these are these ephemeral, dry waterways that are high up in the watershed. And anyone here following, I know TXOGA follows it, kind of the presidential pendulum swing of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, you know that the regulatory status of that 25% of those ephemeral waterways is really in flux, making it more important than ever to know where they are. So we're using machine learning and GIS modeling to find that missing 25% without ever having to go in the field. So really by combining our hundreds of environmental data sets, then layering on things like ghost waters, developable areas, and the automated consulting intelligence to tell you what it all means for your project, you can literally map out your avoidance areas, get a permit matrix, find strategies to minimize your permit burden, plan out your project timeline, truly de-risk your project, all in just a few minutes. So I'm going to end with a quick case study. Before Transect, Plains All-American was spending a ton of time looking for in-house GIS tools, working with third-party information sources. With Transect, they have streamlined their environmental processes, giving deliverables that are 200% better than what they called their homegrown due diligence. They now do environmental due diligence for their own capital projects, where they used to outsource all of that, saving a ton of time and money. They say that because of the consistency of deliverables, ease of use, and their confidence in our platform, Transect is a valued partner, one that has cut due diligence by 40% and increased their confidence of their internal due diligence twofold. So, thank you so much for your time today. I'd love to meet any of you that are interested in learning more about Transect. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or check us out on transect.com. I do have some little cards I'll be leaving behind with a discount code if you do want a Transect subscription for your first year. Thanks again to TXOGA. Thanks for your time, and I guess I'm going to answer some questions.
Yes, and I will say, yes, please. I will try to figure out how I can be a ghost water for next Halloween, because they do sound very spooky, right? They sneak up on you. So I will say, see, I'm helping you with your great jokes over here.
Thank you.
Max and Jake, do y'all have any questions?
Yeah, I'll go with this one.
Okay.
Mic on, I'll try to talk loud. So you said the old school way is all these folders, then everybody has a process, especially bigger companies, they're stuck in their ways. What's the biggest pain point for people to switch to you guys, and what are the things that you, whenever people bring up those pain points, what's your sales pitch to say, hey, look, this is, I mean, you talked a lot about it, but what do they resist whenever you switch to this new method, and what's your sales pitch on saying, hey, this is going to be way better, we're actually going to solve that for you?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think the hardest part to understand is the change in business behavior. So, I kind of gave that story about my client who called me way late in the process. They had already done a center line, they had already kind of planned everything out, and then they're like, okay, fine, now we'll pay a consultant. They don't want to pay us, they don't want to pay a consultant that early in the process. And so that's a big part of kind of the education piece, is trying to teach our customers how to integrate that environmental due diligence process when the project is kind of a twinkle in your eye, right? Look at all 50 routes that you're thinking about, not just the one that you've decided on, and then kind of dealing with the ramifications of it. You can save a ton of time, a ton of money, if you just think about environmental at the beginning. So that's typically kind of the one big sticking point, is how do we implement this? Cost-wise, it's not a one-to-one replacement of you used to get a piece of paper and now you get a Transect report. The tools that we have are giving them so much more intelligence much earlier in the process, and that's a big part of our discussion.
Is it easier to house all the data at the end of the day? Like, instead of having these physical files, do you guys have a way that after you put these reports together, you can streamline going back and looking at all this stuff and being able to pull it up for project by project? Is it, or I'm assuming it's very organized and easier?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything's online. And a PDF report, the other bad thing about a PDF report is that it has a limited set of maps. You can only explore what's actually in that report so much. We tie everything, every piece of intelligence is tied to something on a map. That's really important to know where it is. And so it's a much nicer experience, because you can actually see where that one random waterway is, as opposed to trying to pull out this big long printed map trying to figure out where this tiny little waterway is. So you can see so much more. And because all of our data is digitized, you can also import it into other platforms other tools that our customers use and things like that.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Awesome. Jake, did you have any questions?
Do you have any more jokes for us?
Oh, man. This is totally not related, but it just came to me. So what do you get when you cross a skunk and a helicopter? A smellicopter.
I like that one.
It's not related. It's bad. It's worse than the poop joke.
Thanks
so
everybody.
Much, I appreciate
it. She'll be here all week. All right. A quick update for those in the room. If you'd like to connect to the Wi-Fi, we've got some TXOGA Wi-Fi hotspots. There's either number 1 or number 2 with the password TXOGA 304, all lowercase. So feel free to use those to tweet about this awesome event. That's what you should be using them for. All right, next we will hear from Joe Etheridge with Encino Environmental Services. Joe, welcome to the stage. Let me tell you a little bit about your company. You were founded to meet the growing demand of environmental regulatory support services in response to amendments to the new source performance standards regulations under the Clean Air Act, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Yes.
All right, well, we'll hear more from Joe. Let's welcome Joe to the stage, everyone.
Hey, thank you. So, appreciate that. So today I'm going to talk about ESG strategies in the new environment of climate change. And then, as most of you probably saw yesterday, President Biden issued a statement about 30% methane reductions over the next 10 years. So this is kind of timely, I guess. Basically, so to kind of back up a second, we were founded in 2010. Prior to that, I worked for the TCEQ, did a stint at ConocoPhillips, and it was during that time that I saw the emerging regulations with regard to greenhouse gas mandatory reporting, and then also new source performance standards around engines that kind of impacted upstream and midstream operations, brought a lot of sources into the fold that weren't historically regulated. And so now 10 years later, we're looking at the market sort of driving some of these initiatives as well, access to capital, insurance premiums, and responsibly sourced gas. And then obviously the EPA is kind of sitting on the sidelines looking at how they're going to deal with this as well. And so we're here to help sort of navigate this challenging environment. So how do I forward this? Oh, here. Okay, so one of the issues around any sort of data is reliability and precision. And so the industry has been using for the past 10 years emission factors that come with about a plus or minus 500% uncertainty. And that's mainly due to the fact that they don't incorporate upstream temperatures and pressures into that model. And also these factors were predominantly created out of downstream applications using first generation instruments and technology. So basically bad factors, and that's unfortunately what the industry has been using over the past 10 years. And so our sort of vision is to create a measuring and monitoring program that is specific to the operations and moves away from factors and more to real-time actuals. And then from there, you can use that data for ESG reports, sustainability reports, but then also to go one step further and compare that data to the historically produced emission factors to see exactly how inflated or deflated they were. So what we believe in is that there's not going to be a silver bullet to any type of methane measurement or emissions measurement program. Our approach is vertically integrated, so we believe that LDAR programs, emissions testing programs, continuous emissions monitoring programs, whether it be sniffers or optical devices, agency flyovers, things of this nature are good tools, but they have to be used in unison. They can't, one is not going to replace the other, and you're not going to have a silver bullet throughout this. So what we're trying to do here is move towards unacceptable data sets to direct measurement and traceability and reproducibility to where we get better precision. So one of the things that we've done over the past 12 months is made a series of acquisitions and investments into companies to help us with this. The first is a company that has been providing satellite technology and satellites to the European Union. And so we made an investment into that company, and in 2023 we're going to have our first methane satellite in space, low orbit. It'll be dedicated to our operations, and then within 2 years after that, our plan is to have a constellation of these satellites. So instead of 12-hour coverage, we'll get 90-minute coverage. And what this allows us to do is to input multiple assets and then use it as a screening tool to determine which of those assets require asset grade evaluation. And then after the reductions have been implemented, the operations have been optimized to reduce these emissions, then we'll use the satellite to see if those reductions were sustainable as a continuing sort of program. The second investment that we made is into a data fabrics company called Context Labs. Basically what they do is take disparate data sets, ingest it from the public, from institutional programs within your company, from emissions programs. Basically they take it from any place possible that's applicable to the market and the industry, and then they package it in a way that allows you to benchmark your operations against your peers and then look for continual improvement processes. And so basically the way that this works is that the market is kind of wanting the data sets to be auditable for responsibly sourced gas, things of that nature. In order to do that, you have to be able to track your data from cradle to grave. And so the way we do this with the data fabric is we assign a digital signature or fingerprint to each data point, and then it is given a QR code. So we can see the who, what, when, where, why, and be able to progress through that. Again, this kind of highlights that who, what, when, where, contextual data. So this is some of our monitoring systems. At the top, you'll see one of our continuous emissions monitoring systems. It basically operates with two different technologies. The first is a hyperspectral analyzer, which actually measures the gas species. In this case, it would be methane. The second is an IR function. So basically, it sees the plume, latches onto the plume, speciates the plume, and then translates it into a concentration. Then we have a bolt-on post-processing algorithm that basically takes the conditions of the plume using a Gaussian distribution, turns it from a area to a volume to a mass emissions rate. So this is how we're able to evaluate these sources and provide better emission factors around some of these things. This is supposed to be a video. There it is. So this is one of our systems in action. As you can see, it's pointed at a tank battery. There's methane coming off the tanks. And so what we do in the post-processing of this data is we have a still frame that basically takes plume data that occupied the entire frame over the entire duration. And then from that, we take our measurements and convert it into a mass emissions rate. This is a perfect example of ways to optimize your operations. We see leaky thief hatches, we see leaky Anardo valves, connectors, flanges, things of that nature. So we have an instantaneous ability to respond to some of these leaks. Finally, our satellite here. So just to kind of give you some context, the current satellites that are available for methane detection, the main ones being the TROPOME, the VIIRS, and the GHG-SAT, they have a spatial resolution of around 7 kilometers, which gets you into a region. I think that they were designed to look at basin-wide imagery. So our system has a spatial resolution of around 2 meters. And so we're getting better to be able to hone in on a source with better granularity. And part of the reason for this is that the algorithm that our company has developed essentially improves the performance of the optics. So what it does is it uses the optical imagery and then processes it in such a way to where we get better resolution. And so there is an example of just applying it to current visible satellites, how you get better resolution. So this partnership that we've formed with these companies and these investments that we've made, our vision is to be able to provide a cradle-to-grave solution for ESG monitoring and measurement and reporting. There's utility with this across the board, not just for ESG and sustainability reports, but also for any type of regulatory submittal as well. And the way that the system works is it pipes into any types of data streams that you may have. So it would be SAP, Maximo, AX. It can even pull data from SCADA operations, process level data, and overlay that onto any types of emissions events or measurements and monitoring activities that have been performed at that site. So basically, with machine learning, it looks for relationships, and over time, it allows you the ability to look at your operations and predict, and then perhaps enhance. So with that, that concludes my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, wait just a second. Let's see if we have any questions.
Okay.
Do y'all have any questions for Joe?
I'll go for it. Is it like when you look at the oil field as a whole? Is that number one? Is that your primary focus? Is it upstream, midstream, downstream, the whole spectrum? Is it easy to target the major sources, or is it when you look at the oil field, is it kind of death by 1,000 cuts? And so you really have to have this. You really have to look at all of it to kind of find exactly where these points are.
Right. Yeah. So I'll give you a good example. We had one deployment at a water midstream facility. So basically, they kind of go unnoticed, unregulated, because they have at most 1% hydrocarbon in the stream. However, they were actually getting notices from flyovers, from agency flyovers.
Okay.
And so the agency more or less forced them to justify what they saw in the video and account for it. And so we set up one of these systems on that location for 30 days. And what we found out was that the majority of emissions associated with that facility were transient. So it was from a facility next door. Okay. It was a producer with an open, they left their thief hatches open, and it was kind of coming across the location. And so to look at it in greater detail, because basically the agency said that they weren't operating within their permit. So what we did is we took a produced water sample, looked at the hydrocarbons in the stream, flashed it in a ProMax model, and then compared that to the emissions data once we took out the transient, and it was within plus or minus 15%. Okay. So we were able to take this package, put it together, and then draft a response to the agency. But basically, in that process, we learned that these agencies and NGOs are looking at basically any type of hydrocarbon source. So typically, and that's part of the reason where the satellite comes into play, providing a screening tool, because every customer says, well, I have 1,400 assets, where do I begin, right? You have to have some way to screen it. And we do have some criteria around that. We look at acquisitions, we look at the age of the facility, different types of LDAR data, perhaps they've had a lot of leaks and repairs. So we look at that to sort of screen it. But I think that the bottom line is everything's a target, right, basically.
Could you, like, in theory, start to rank these things, and you can get smarter and say, look, we know these compressors blow down, we know these certain types of valves or hatches, and you can maybe come up with a list, or
Sure.
get more targeted over time to say, here's what you should probably be looking for, rather than, to your point, be able to blow it in.
So, and a good example of that is, so with our emissions testing program over the past 11 years, we've noticed that methane slip, it could be a problem in natural gas-fired engines and combustors. Right. We've seen it with our optical device as well, but with having that optical device on location for a period of 30 days, we can see the performance over time. And so what we've noticed from that is if air temperatures are above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you have minimal methane slip. But as soon as you have a temperature drop, and especially in the case of snow accumulation, you have higher rates of methane slip, and that's due to heat loss to the environment. So the simple fix there is put some insulation around your post-combustion equipment, and that'll get you the better destruction removal efficiency. That's a simple example. Right. The other thing that we've seen is that, for the most part, normal production operations, the emissions by and large are rather minimal. They're highly intermittent, okay, sporadic, and if you think about air permits, they require you to look at potential to emit. So you're basically inflating the numbers in an air permit, when in actuality process emissions are much, much less. The problem is not with process emissions, it's with maintenance, startup, and shutdown, and alternate operating scenarios. So anytime you have a tank degassing event, compressor blowdown, sight glass cleaning, any type of, or pigging activity, sure, anything, those are going to be your larger contributors. And so that is an opportunity. So what we typically do in our deployments, at the first 2 weeks we look at normal production operations. The second part of that, we look at these different types of activities, and then we're able to make recommendations based upon that, because we can actually see what the actual impact is.
It's really interesting. Anything else?
There's a lot of companies entering this space, and I think it's fantastic. I think I've talked to about a dozen companies that have entered the continuous monitoring and kind of the reporting, whether it be third-party reporting or internal reporting, probably in the last month. And so it's becoming hard for me to even kind of differentiate between some of the key differences between some of these technologies. And so if it's hard for me, I'm sure it's hard for a lot of other people too. What would you say is like y'all's key differentiation? I guess one that kind of comes to mind would be like a Project Canary is kind of top of mind there. Like, and what is y'all's kind of competitive advantage?
Yeah, so to the best of my knowledge, Project Canary is using a very specific types of instrument. It's what I consider to be blind tech, so it's a sniffer basically. It's extracting something out of the environment and analyzing it. The problem with that is, number one, it can only be located at a certain height above grade, because it's subject to wind flux beyond that. If you're not 20 feet in the air, then you're probably not capturing tank vents or venting activities. So there's some limitations there to that. We feel that the optical device with the hyperspectral imaging system helps both the corporate initiatives on understanding emissions, but then also the operators on the ground who have to actually go out there and do something about it, because they can see a visual. We set the system up to where they get alerts, so they can go back, log into the IP, and see exactly all the details of that event, and then reconcile it. The other thing is, I mean, we have as I mentioned earlier, we don't believe there's a silver bullet. There's a vertically integrated approach here that one has to look at. You have to look at asset grade monitoring, you have to look at drones and flyovers, and you also have to look at space options as that technology gets better. So we're thinking a little bigger, I think, in those terms, because that's where the puck is going and that's where all this is headed. With the data fabric that we have that ingests any type of data streams, we're kind of agnostic to the technology as well, because we kind of feel, right now our technology is great, we like it, but a year from now is there going to be something better in the market? So we have to be open to ingesting that as well. So we're trying to be flexible in the monitoring space.
Great answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank
we
you.
Appreciate it. Let's give him a hand. Next this morning, we have Bear Gavan, who's the founder and CEO of EarthView. And so while Bear makes his way to the stage, EarthView's Bluebird technology detects and quantifies methane emissions for Texas operators. And EarthView's innovations include constantly improving separate algorithms, and all in an effort to help industry manage emissions and keep production where it belongs in the sales line. So thanks, Bear. We'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. And I want to thank TXOGA for allowing us to present here. And really excited to show off kind of some stuff we've been doing here at EarthView. And before I get kind of going on that, I just want to talk a minute about how I kind of got into this space and kind of get going with how our technology formed and how the team got going. Again, my name is Bear Gavan, founder, CEO of EarthView. We got going in late 2019, which, as I always joke, was a fun time to start an environmental oil field service company. But, we just used that as an opportunity to develop our tech out a little more through 2020. It was a tough summer of cold calling, but, here we are in 2021, and, methane emissions, as Joe was kind of alluding to there, is top of mind with EPA coming out with some of their, impending regulations. So more regulations for everyone to worry about, always fun. And just to give you guys a little bit of kind of how I got into the space. So I started out as a pilot conducting some of those flyovers. So I've flown North Slope of Alaska, looking for methane release from permafrost melt on the kind of the more environmental side. Gotten to look at landfills, feedlots. So if it's emitted methane, chances are I've flown some circles around it at some point. And that kind of led to doing some work down in the oil patch, down in the Permian, and getting to look out the window there at, about 200 feet off the ground, seeing all these well patches and thinking, wow, there's, any one of these has potentials to leak, and, there's got to be a better solution than flying over these and, something a little more frequent. And that's kind of how we got going on our continuous emissions monitoring. Now all right, so what is EarthView? So we build, similar to Canary, kind of a stationary fixed monitoring system utilizing low-cost sensors. And, just to kind of step back, why do we really care about methane? What's important about it, and why is it, top of mind? And methane, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, is one of the main components of natural gas, and we think it's a valuable commodity, and it can be harmful to the planet. As compared to CO2, methane has 90% more potency as a greenhouse gas over a 10-year time period. So it's really kind of the low-hanging fruit as far as this climate battle we all find ourselves in here. And here at EarthView, we really think that there's a cost-effective way to monitor and reduce these emissions. And I'd like to kind of go over some of those here. And then before I get into that, just kind of go over the team here. So obviously I'd be nowhere without these guys here helping us get this platform off the ground. We've got our chief scientist who started off in the Arctic, kind of like me, and he was a big fan of utilizing low-cost sensor technologies to find methane leaks as they relate to permafrost. We got a great CTO helping us build the tech behind the scenes. He's probably currently coding right now. And then, Matthew Barnes, who I'm sure some of you guys have met at this point, brings a lot of oil and gas knowledge to our team that we were lacking. And with that, we kind of got rolling. And we're here to kind of help solve some of these environmental, We're here to kind of help solve some of these environmental problems whether it be operational inefficiencies or environmental compliance or getting ahead of any impending regulations we have coming down the pipe here. And I'm excited to kind of show off some progress here, but really 2021 February is kind of when we got going. We launched our first sensor suite with an operator out here in the Haynesville, and immediately we were able to catch a leak off a separator. And we've got this is our Bluebird platform. So as Joe was kind of talking about earlier, we noticed that, hey, methane rises and we want to be able to catch emissions off the tank. So one of our first things was to raise that intake up. It sits roughly about 17 feet off the ground. We got our communications antenna there, wind sensor for calculating the flux to get that quantification. And then down there at the bottom, we've got the methane sensing technology with a bunch of other sensors as well. So really kind of one of our differentiating technologies is our ability to use sensor fusion. So not only are we looking at methane, we're looking at VOC and particulate matter, as well as a lot of climate data, which all goes into kind of understanding, hey, what's going on these well pads. And so this device transmits via the cell network, and we do have options for satellite and Wi-Fi if it's available. And all that data is going to the cloud. It's being processed as kind of a hybrid cloud model. And processed data is being pitched out to our dashboard, kind of using some of the new emerging technologies that have been mentioned so far here. Moving on here. So when we first started out, we wanted to say as a good kind of scientific team, we wanted to try to disprove our instrument. So to do that, well, fortunately, we did not disprove that it worked. We actually proved that it worked a little better than we anticipated. But, one of my most productive cold calls, I'd say, was to the mayor of Broomfield, who let us, Broomfield, Colorado, which is a suburb just north of Denver, and they let us utilize their $1 million research trailer to do a really useful A/B comparison. So they had a VOC gas spectrometer on there. They had a reference grade methane analyzer. We were able to really compare our instrument to what these instruments were seeing. And fortunately, if you look down to the south there's a nice large well pad that would emit some wet gas events every now and then, so we could see what was going on as compared to these higher dollar instruments. So that gave us encouragement to continue. Ooh, wrong button. And here in just the summer of 2021, we've now deployed in Texas. So we got a few units up here in North Texas. We're out in the DJ in Colorado, monitoring for VOCs per the new Colorado regulations. We're in the Marcellus as well, and also the Haynesville with actually deployment coming up tomorrow. So exciting times, and we're definitely happy with the growth. But now, getting into the fun part here is some of the results we've seen. So we've caught leaks from separators, tanks, compressors, and the wellheads, and we've caught a number of different events since we've deployed in April. And we got out there late May and caught an event 2 days later, which we weren't quite ready for, but it was a hung dump valve on a separator, and it worked as advertised, which is really nice to see. And then here, getting into some other good stuff. So this was recently here, actually in a pad here just in the North Dallas area. We caught 3 events in 72 hours. And I will say, hey, getting called an emission storks by the lease operator is one of our, we take that with a badge of honor there. So we caught an open thief hatch, which was closed. And as you can see here, this is kind of our live dashboard and platform that we've built. It's showing kind of your gas readouts. And we caught the open thief hatch. And water hauler left it open. Guy went out there, closed it. Later on that day, something on the supply line broke. Getting alerts there, send it back out there to fix that. And then that next Sunday, a scrubber on the compressor was also broke. So they were able to fix that too. And really the real question is, what would happen if we weren't there? And I think the operator is still kind of thinking about that and really being able to say this technology, hey, it's low cost, so it's there to really catch leaks and fix them as quickly as we can. And here, just one more example. This is kind of one of my favorites, but this is an example of a off-pad emission source that we caught. So this is really kind of a passive emissions moving through our monitored pad up there to the north. We were able to see the methane concentrations reduce as the winds blew from the south, so kind of matching up with our dispersion models there. And we're able to quickly verify that this was an intermittent event that we were first seeing at 2 a.m. All the way until in the afternoon and later, and the operator went out and they actually weren't able to find it the first time. And we said, no, we really think there's something there. And fortunately, we were right, and able to catch that, and just really happy with the progress we've made here. And that's all I got. Any questions?
Hands. Max? Yeah.
So you went from doing flyovers and flying in Alaska. It's kind of you seem like, were you an adrenaline junkie? Do you miss doing that?
Yeah. It was like going to work and hopping on a roller coaster every day.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, you obviously have to look at the weather conditions, and things can change, and that's going to affect how you fly. When you have these sensors out here on these well pads, the way that the weather changes, how the conditions change, how that may mess with your data, how do you guys manage that day to day?
So that's a great question, and that's actually one of kind of another differentiation for us is, these sensors are notorious for giving false positives when temperature and humidity are changing. So one of our early deals that we've done, and that was that Broomfield study, was, hey, building out these proprietary algorithms that correct for those temperature and humidity changes. And as a pilot too, when we go and set it up, one of the first things I look at is, hey, what are the winds doing on this location? What are the prevailing winds doing, and how are we going to position these sensors so that we capture the most amount of emissions? So, winds change. There's a chance we might not pick up an emission at this point, but having grown up actually I grew up right around here and have been living in Colorado. The winds always change, so we'll get that plume at some point and be able to catch it quickly.
Cool. We got Jake.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Josh. So it seems like they're kind of taking this more of high-end, you got sensors in space kind of thing. You harped on the low-cost sensors kind of there on the well site. So maybe elaborate a little bit on the differentiation between you and some of the other people in the space. And then I got a follow-up question.
Sure. So, to be completely honest with you there, Jake, I don't know too much about the satellites in space. And I know you got GHGSat that are operating on more of a regional level. And we're really more on a facility level, and I know that there's technology coming around here soon that might allow the satellites to operate on a finer resolution. But one of the flights I did as a research pilot was satellite validation flights. So we'd go off the coast of the Pacific, start off at 30,000 feet, and I'd have to be down my profile right as the satellite flew over for NASA. And they're still comparing our in situ measurements to what the satellite is needing. So these satellites are going to need some form of calibration, and ground sensors like us can provide that moving forward. So I think that there's, like Joe was saying, there's no silver bullet, and I think continuous monitoring on a low-cost, scalable level is going to allow operators to detect leaks quicker and fix them, which ultimately will reduce methane across any basin we're operating in.
And I think you guys are probably the youngest company here, and I love it. Like you said, you started in 2019, kind of building through the downturn, asking kind of the same question that I asked Josh, knowing that you're young, you have a lot of legs to you. Where do you see Earthview going in the next 2 to 3 years? Like, what is the ultimate vision for the company?
Oh man, my vision is to have these sensors on every well pad, but we can only hope, right? But no, there's so much. Our core Earthview is utilizing low-cost sensors with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now that's applicable in a number of industries where real-time monitoring of gases is of concern. Whether it be in the vineyards, whether it be in agriculture. We just view oil and gas right now as, a really important area to start this process. And, we're friends to the industry. We grew up around here. I fully believe in being able to power our homes, so we're here to help, and we view this as kind of the place to start.
Great answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Barry.
Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it. All right. Next, we have Anna Perini with Crusoe Energy. And Anna is here, and she is going to tell us about Crusoe, which provides oil and gas companies with an environmentally and economically beneficial solutions to eliminate natural gas flaring with its patented digital flare mitigation system, which captures natural gas and repurposes it to power energy-intensive computing directly at the well site. So Anna, we look forward to hearing more. Thank you so much for being here today. Everyone, let's give her a hand.
Thank you, Shana. First off, I'd like to thank the TXOGA organization for the opportunity to present today. It's an honor to share the podium with this cohort of amazing entrepreneurs and industry leaders, and it's a privilege to address the oil and gas community in Texas here today. My name is Anna Perini, and I'm the Business Development Manager with Crusoe Energy Systems. I've spent the last 15 years working in the upstream oil and gas industry as a landman. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of working with both public and private operators, from the Williston Basin in North Dakota to the Permian Basin down here in Texas. I started my career in the Bakken in 2004. I was working as a landman before the drilling of the shale revolution had really kicked off. I was putting myself through college with money earned running title, and every summer I'd fly back into Williston, and I would notice the growing number of flares on the horizon. I was awed at how much production there was, but I was also puzzled by why there was so much flaring going on. Most of us in this room have probably had a similar experience flying into Williston, Casper, or Midland. And as operators capitalized on booming oil prices and raced to hold leases, infrastructure was still years away. While the industry has taken massive strides in curtailing their flaring, and infrastructure has grown quite a bit, today there are still certain areas where pipelines are constrained and non-existent, and flaring is still a problem. Today, over 14.5 billion cubic feet of gas is flared daily across the globe. That's enough, if converted to electricity, to power the entire continent of Africa. This creates a massive emissions footprint and has no beneficial use. So it's really a lose-lose situation all the way around. The Railroad Commission and operators in this room have done so much to reduce flaring in the state of Texas. At a recent Railroad Commission meeting in September, Chairman Wayne Christian quoted that we're down to 1% of all gas produced in Texas that's being flared, and that's a huge achievement for everyone in this room, and we should all be really proud. But the chairman also stated that it's not through regulation alone that these changes are being adopted, but rather through private industry correcting the problem. And I'd like to share a little bit about how Crusoe is one of those private companies that's bringing a new technology directly to the well site that's affording operators maximum development flexibility, improving ESG performance, and an opportunity to realize a revenue stream from an otherwise wasted commodity at no cost to them. Crusoe Energy was founded in 2018 by Cully Cavness and Chase Lockmiller. Cully comes from a third-generation oil and gas family in Denver, and it was when he was working as the VP of Finance for an oil and gas company in the DJ that he was struggling with the outright waste and environmental impact caused when his company was forced to flare due to a lack of infrastructure. Chase started his career in the quantitative finance space, and he was working at a hedge fund. Throughout his career, Chase used AI modeling techniques to build large-scale stock forecasting models, and he came to appreciate the immense compute power and energy consumption that went into running those models. It was on a hiking trip in the Rockies that Chase and Cully discovered the intersect between their two backgrounds and realized that they could potentially solve one person's problem with the other's. They figured if they could consume the associated flare gas from a shale well with on-site power generation equipment and modular data centers, they could unlock the value of that stranded energy through the power of computation right at the well site. And that's what they set out to do. Digital flare mitigation converts stranded natural gas into electricity for energy-intensive computing right at the well site. Our technology solves critical regulatory and environmental issues and offers operators a beneficial use, reduces their flaring, and lowers their emissions at no cost to the operator. Our solution is modular and can scale up or down as an operator needs. It's mobile, so it can be moved around as gas volumes decrease and infrastructure catches up. And it's also location agnostic. We can operate in nearly all kinds of terrains and locations due to our satellite connections. Our co-founder Chase likes to say it's easier to move a bit than a molecule, and with digital flare mitigation, we are doing just that. To date, we've deployed over 90 data centers in the oil field, and we've mitigated over 1 billion cubic feet of flare gas. At present, we've contracted DFM systems in Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado, and we have plans to expand into New Mexico and Texas this year. By now, I assume that you've all potentially heard of this kind of technology. Crusoe was one of the early pioneers, but there have been many other companies that have kind of come up in the recent years, in the last 12 to 18 months, that are emulating something similar. So I'm going to go through these next few slides rather quickly to just kind of explain our process and also address some of the questions I get when I'm talking to operators about our solution. So Crusoe works with operators to identify sites where associated gas is being flared at a sufficient rate to justify our equipment mobilization. We're not a great opportunity, or we're not a great solution for low pressure gas like tank vapors or extremely intermittent gas like compressor stations or things like that. We require at least a minimum volume of gas, and for the production engineers in the room, for our equipment, we like to have at least 300 MCF a day. That puts out about 2 megawatts worth of power and can power 2 of our data centers. We also are not a great solution for operators who are trying to just increase their netbacks. Crusoe has an environmental mandate where we will not take on a project that does not have an environmental benefit. So we actually have to be running off of something like flare gas. So one of the first questions I had when I came to Crusoe, putting my landman hat back on, was how is a company like this going to handle royalty payments and surface access? Crusoe has found that the cleanest way to ensure there's no conflict with mineral owners is to act as a third-party purchaser. Traditionally, we've used a modified gas purchase agreement and with a negotiated per MCF purchase price, and that provides a baseline for taxes and royalties, and we've established a custody transfer meter right on site. In this arrangement, operators are not required to put forth any capital. We also have we've also typically operated under the operator's surface use agreement by classifying our equipment as emissions reduction equipment or production equipment, and many of our operators have taken a step further to secure amendments to those SUAs that they have in order to explicitly allow for our equipment to be on site. For companies interested in crypto exposure, we are happy to get creative and share participation models and to help management teams get comfortable with crypto. And that's just something we would talk about on a case-by-case basis. So after an agreement is signed, we can be on site and operating within a week. As I mentioned earlier, we need about 300 MCF a day to run. We can handle BTUs ranging from 900 to 2,500. A lot of times operators will put us on site with CNG or other forms of liquid stripping processes. We need PSI of between 30 to 150 PSI. So like I said, we're not great for those low pressure tank vapors, but we can handle a lot of other gas. And then I know in Texas, H2S is a big problem. We have been working really hard to try to find some H2S solutions. We have not deployed anything yet at this time. H2S is just really corrosive and damaging to our equipment, so we've yet to take on one of those projects, and so right now we're kind of avoiding those, but we are working on that solution. For the facilities folks in the room, we need about a 50 by 75 foot footprint on the well pad for every 300 MCF a day that we're going to take down. So as I said, these are modular and can kind of scale up or down to meet your gas volumes, and so just kind of do that math as you imagine how much space we would need on a well pad. This diagram shows that we have, on the right shows 2 modules, and on the left just shows a single module deployment. Emissions reduction. So based on recent studies, flares are estimated to be 90 to 93% efficient in the combustion of methane. For EHS and air quality folks in the room, Crusoe's equipment is designed for stoichiometric combustion, which basically ensures the correct air-to-fuel mixture to achieve a 99.89% combustion efficiency. Crusoe has actually verified that via stack testing. This is a significant reduction in emissions compared to a flare, and as methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. One DFM system mitigates around 63% CO2 equivalent per year compared to flaring. And additionally, Crusoe's catalytic converters are state-of-the-art, and they effectively reduce NOx, SOx, and VOCs, which are also harmful to local air quality and contribute to smog. As I mentioned before, Crusoe's networking team can get us hooked up to the internet virtually anywhere via satellite or microwave or fiber, kind of whatever's in the area. So some use cases. Digital flare mitigation can be utilized in a number of ways to reduce flaring in the oil field. We can assist operators when drilling wells outside of infrastructure, exploring new areas of development, or saving leases from expiration. We can help in instances of pipeline capacity issues or constraints. We can provide a solution in times of extended gas plant downtime. And one commonly utilized case is when in areas such as the Bakken, where there's challenging topography. Due to the topography of the Badlands, oftentimes midstream companies cannot actually build infrastructure to meet these remote well pads. So digital flare mitigation delivers a solution for stranded locations which may never justify or realize permanent gas takeaway infrastructure. Also, all of you lemon in the room may have had experience with this, but sometimes despite your best efforts, you're just not going to get that surface use agreement or that right-of-way from certain landowners to cross their paths. So this is, like I said, a location-agnostic on-site solution that can kind of help you around situations like that. Oftentimes there are midstream infrastructure lacks the investment to keep up with the development, so that's very common in places like the Bakken and the Permian. And our distributed system helps operators efficiently manage and constrained wells with interruptible contracts and capacity limitations. Also, exploration wells are remote and often lack adjacent infrastructure, which makes midstream investment not really economic until scale is achieved, so we can be a great solution in the interim while operators are kind of testing new areas. This is a image of our latest large-scale deployment. We actually are working with a Tier 1 operator in North Dakota who had 5 ducts that they were unable to complete due to lack of right-of-way, and we were able to put out a turbine which can take down about 3 million cubic feet a day and power 16 data centers right on site. So we're going to be there from the time they IP those wells, and then as the production decreases along the curve, we're going to pull equipment as necessary. Crusoe employs a talented and diverse workforce of software engineers sitting in San Francisco. Our finance, business development, and engineering teams sit in Denver, and we have a large field office in North Dakota, which we hope to duplicate here either in Texas or New Mexico as we expand our Permian position. To date, Crusoe has raised over $250 million in equity and project financing from a lot of ESG-focused venture capitalists and funds, such as the Founders Fund, Upper 90, Bain Capital, and Valor Equity Partners. We hope to close on another $100 million in debt in the next few months, and that will help fund further expansion into the Permian. So while cryptocurrency is a really large part of our business at this time, we view our value proposition as building out a low-cost, carbon-negative, high-performance computing infrastructure on these well sites that will help power applications like AI, machine learning, computational biology, and other rendering or other projects like that. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. So Max and Jake, while she gets water.
Yeah. Thanks. One thing I noticed is, and I'm pretty familiar with this space, and we do a lot of midstream and energy marketing, our company, and have a lot of clients asking about this a lot. I noticed that you didn't mention Bitcoin. You said crypto kind of a little bit, didn't mention Bitcoin. I think maybe there was a stigma. I feel like now that stigma is going away a little bit. How much education do you have to do with producers? Is there still that stigma with Bitcoin, and are you seeing that getting better, or how do you guys manage that?
Yeah, so I would say I started with Crusoe in February, and the first conversations I was having with operators, most of the time operators would say, I don't know anything about Bitcoin, I don't know anything about crypto, we don't want anything to do with that, we wouldn't touch it.
Right.
They come buy the gas from us and make our flare go away.
Right.
Now I would say the majority of the conversations I'm having, a lot of those even same operators have come back and said, so tell me about this Bitcoin thing. Like, what if we did want this exposure?
Right.
So I would say the education process is much easier now. We're no longer having to kind of, start explaining with like, what is Bitcoin? But more so just like, what would a participation model look like? How could you and your company get comfortable with investing in the infrastructure that it takes to power these?
That was my next question, was just like partnership structures, things like that. Again, coming from the midstream or energy marketing space, what I would say is kind of a cardinal sin in midstream is if the producer ever finds out that you're making more on their product than they're making on it, it's a bad thing in midstream. And so if producers realize there's this value there, you guys are open to partnering and maybe investing side by side and letting guys get exposure, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of how we've looked at it. There was some a lot of folks have asked us, like, well, if we want to do this ourselves, would you franchise this? Would you, just sell us the equipment? And that's not typically what we would be interested in doing. We would rather kind of have more of a investing alongside approach, where Crusoe, our software engineers have written some incredible programs that keep our uptime we're at 98% available for service, right?
That's great.
So we would recommend that if an operator is going to try to do this kind of thing, that they can kind of partner with an experienced miner, because uptime is going to be your number one trigger. You want to make sure that you're with someone that keeps their equipment up and running. So we would kind of be open to having an oil company invest alongside of us, but you also have to kind of realize that this is a massive capital contribution.
Tons of capital.
So I would say even to put out one of these, modules that would take down even 300 MCF a day, you're in the multiple millions of dollars to do that.
That's what I was going to ask you too. That's kind of came to when you said 3,000 a day on that turbine deployment.
Yeah,
3 million a day.
Yeah,
yeah. So that's a huge amount of capital for a project. And you can share just ballpark on capital just to give people some perspective.
I don't want to talk about pricing, but
okay, yeah. Well, you don't have to tell me your pricing, but I just know from experience that is a staggering amount of capital, and producers may not realize, probably even more so than midstream capital in some ways. So, anyways, people just need to keep that in mind.
Yes, it is a massive capital contribution, and what we've come to realize is that most operators do not want to divert capital away from their core business, which is drilling wells.
Right.
So,
go ahead, Jake.
Max pretty much stole all my questions.
Great.
But I will just say that, the education piece on Bitcoin mining, we had Cully on our podcast end of 2019. It was kind of like the first time that anything had really been said about that publicly in the industry. Since then, I would say that I've lost count of the number of companies that have been in our office, whether it be operators, whether it be miners who are just looking for natural gas assets. I'd say that Bitcoin mining using natural gas is like where oil and gas was in the 1920s. This is going to be a huge land grab, so I think it's a super exciting space, and I would lean into it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Appreciate it. Now we're going to hear from Adam Murray, Vice President of WeldFit. Adam, come on up. I'll tell you a little bit more about WeldFit. It was established more than 50 years ago, and it's a pipeline products and services company that helps oil and gas customers optimize their pipeline operations with a focus on safety and reliability of their products and services. So thank you, Adam, so much for being here today. We'll give it to you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Good morning, by the way. We're getting through it. All right, first off, like everybody, thank you to TXOGA for having us here today. We're excited about all the new technologies and honored to be here with such great companies. I also want to thank the on-site monitoring folks in Crusoe Energy for going before us, because while we're not ever going to be able to prevent all the leaks and all the thief hatches that stop, and then a permanent solution for disconnected wells and permanent flaring, I'm here to talk about our recap emissions recovery system. So what that, my notes, I have to switch here manually, sorry. So I'm here to talk about the emissions recovery system. So our mission for recap is to eliminate voluntary venting and or mobile flaring. So the more temporary solutions that were referenced in the last presentation. So, we understand that life, health, and safety are paramount in our industry, but rapidly rising is number two, environmental, right? So it's been in the news everywhere as recently as yesterday, as discussed. So there's really no more excuses for any release of methane, crude, refined products, etc. So environmental stewardship is really turning into our industry's license to operate, right? It provides a path to construct new pipelines, new infrastructure, and any incident in the field is an indictment on our entire industry. So if we look to the people to the right and to the left, you have to hold them responsible for what they're doing just the same as they have to hold you responsible. So we really are trying to control those items. So today it's common practice in standard operations to vent or burn natural gas by flaring, and that releases harmful greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. As referenced, the U.S. Energy Information Administration said 538 billion standard cubic feet were vented or flared in 2019. So let's look at specifically what mobile flaring, particular, and planned venting are. So you can kind of hear how loud that is, but this is the more important one here, right? Now that kind of makes me mad a little bit as I stand up here. But you can see how loud, obtrusive, visual that is, right? So companies receive complaints, calls, 911 even frequently receives calls and emails like this. And so to alter the course of the oil and gas industry, goals are established to try and limit what we're doing here. And so to that point, led by the One Coalition, voluntarily reduce methane emissions across the natural gas chain to 1%. And so doing that by 2025. We're also working to implement emissions reducing technologies and better methane management, through the Natural Gas STAR program and the EPA. And what's important here is they're tying those to executive payment structures, they're tying those to corporate compensation plans. And so it's nice that things are starting to catch on. And so we have these goals and we know kind of what we're doing wrong, and the voluntary emitting or planned emitting is really low-hanging fruit. I mean, if connecting the permanent flares and identifying the methane leaks, is the low-hanging fruit, this is stuff we plan on every day. I mean, when you're going to have a compressor shutdown, when you're going to have a plant takedown. So where do we go from here, right? And so whether it's by regulation or not, the option to do what I just showed you there is not going to be around for very much longer. I can tell you that right now. New Mexico is state number 1, I think, to eliminate voluntary emissions, and you can better believe Colorado and Pennsylvania are probably right behind it. So thankfully, solutions are starting to appear. And that's where our recap emissions recovery system comes in. So this was designed for safety, ease of use, and speed of depressurization. It has real-world applications in mind. So with a safety-first approach, we did a full HAZOP and PHA on the recap system. Safety measures include multiple PSVs, gas detection, alarms, automatic shutdowns on the onboard PLC for upset conditions. And then compared to venting or flaring, depressurization times are actually of the utmost importance, right? We can't have our field labor crews sitting around while we wait to compress the natural gas and move it. And so a single recap unit that we have developed can move up to 1.2 million standard cubic feet per day. And you can also combine multiple systems to double or even triple capacity of those units. Weld fit also designed for ease of use, right? You gotta be able to use the equipment if you want to get it out in the field. So this package is almost fully autonomous. It's a simple 3-step process that you can complete your project in. So first you set the parameters and you connect up the system. Next you hook up the suction and discharge hoses, which are shown here on a hot tap and line stop services that we also offer. Next, you open the valves, pressure up the system. So this is an example where we're pressuring up to 1200 psi, and I should mention that our system is designed to go from 0 psig to 1440 psig, which covers a majority of the midstream applications around. It will go up to 5000 psig with a few modifications, so giving it additional applications. So the system is fully adaptable to depressurized applications ranging from small filter separators and pig barrels to large transmission line service activities. So once you turn on the recap system, it starts moving gas. So as you can see here on the left, it starts to depressurize, and then the line is fully depressurized once the gauge reads 0. You can then turn the valves and disconnect your system, and your job is complete. The line segment or vessel or whatever it is you're depressurizing can now be safely accessed. So you're going to see the pipe come off here, giving you not only emissions reduction and preventing methane release, but you're also making it a safer work environment for your workers that are working on active pipelines or working on active pieces of equipment. So from routine flaring and pigging, line stops in large transmission lines, shutdowns or blowdowns of compressor stations and plants. The recap system is the superior safe alternative to venting and flaring that keeps gas contained in the pipeline. This is a patent-pending, state-of-the-art emissions reducing technology, and it addresses all the ESG goals that we're going over and provides overall a 99+% reduction in voluntary methane emissions. So thank you guys for your time, and I'm available for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. We probably have time for one question.
Okay, real quick. So you said the hot tap application was really interesting. For other applications like blowdowns at plants or these things, could you put it into like a pressurized vessel? Like, what would be other ways if you didn't have, for example, where you looped it like that? Just for my.
Yeah. So we've done, up to 30,000 feet. We've actually done up to 5-mile pipeline jobs in Griffin, Georgia. We've done repressurization in Carlsbad, New Mexico. So that's sort of the scope, the large scope. If there isn't a connection on site to kind of go around the valve, there are CNG truck types that you can pressure up. And that's the importance of being able to go to 5,000 PSIG, because you can pressure up those trucks, get more gas in there, and move it down to an injection point somewhere downstream.
That's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. Let's give him a hand. All right, we have 2 more presenters. All right, our next presenter is Santiago Ramirez with Baker Hughes. Thank you for being here today. Santiago is going to discuss Baker Hughes' solution to remote monitoring and production optimization, which in a pilot project showed much success. So using advanced analytics through machine learning and smart edge technology to automate and boost production, Baker Hughes saw an increase in production of 94 and a 94 decrease in methane emissions. So Santiago, you take it from here. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I do appreciate the opportunity to discuss one of our different approaches to the digitalization and the digital transformation within our industry. This is a part of our larger portfolio called Production Link. In this specific case, Production Link Edge, which probably majority of you have already been exposed or familiarized with the concept of edge computing, right? So what I would like to show you guys here today would be a basic use case that we have been able to deploy successfully in the Haynesville play, and share some of the results that hopefully could, at the end of the day, have a significant impact in how you're managing or reducing the amount of emissions that are being generated out of gas-producing wells, right? So just a quick overview here. Essentially, we're just going to have a fairly high-level overview of the implementation that we have already been able to deploy. Show you just a bit of the results on the case study, and hopefully we can discuss at the end of the presentation a couple of questions. There you go. So in specific applications such as the gas-producing wells in a really late stage of the well life, where reservoir pressure is not enough to have a continuous production, there's a technique called intermittent lift or intermittent gas production that ultimately just consists of allowing pressure to build up within the well and actually going to the point where the pressure is enough to put the well back into production, produce the well for a certain amount of time until that production declines to the point where it's no longer economical to have it active, and then you will just go start all over again and shut in the well, allow the pressure to build back up, and do it so on and so forth, right? So for fields where you have probably tens or hundreds of these type of wells, this is a very labor-intensive task, especially identifying which is the optimal set points of this cycling process to be able to maximize your production. And then on top of that, whenever this type of wells are being produced under this technique, there's also an issue of well loading or liquid loading of the wells that eventually can probably not be produced anymore due to liquid loading. So at the point that when this happens, the liquid has to be lifted out of the well through different techniques, and then at some point flow back into a tank. And as you were seeing the video previously, something similar happens. At some point having to release that methane into the atmosphere. So our approach here essentially was to use an edge computing device, which at the end of the day, it's bringing computational capacity to the edge of any given industrial process. In this particular case, it's an intermittent gas producing well, to be able to host a complex analytic or machine learning analytics to have an autonomous control of these set points of these parameters, which mainly comes down to the differential pressure at the wellhead and the gas rate that is being produced. So by being able to deploy each of an edge device to each one of these specific wells, we were able to run that analytic locally, removing the potential issues of having, not a steady connection back to the cloud where you're running this complex analytics where you have computational capacity at an enterprise level server, but you're actually doing it on site with the capability of hosting some data and also being able to be remotely monitored through a SCADA, through a cloud-based environment, but having the computational capability on site. So essentially, we're looking at optimizing an objective function at the end of the day, right? So it's essentially when to open a well and when to shut in a well. At this point is the pressure, like I mentioned earlier, and as well as the gas rate that it's going to be produced during an intermittent cycle, which is from all the way that it's open into production and when it's closed or shut in, again, to allow to build back the pressure. So this looks essentially something like this, where you will allow the pressure to build up, and then you start opening and producing the well to the point that you will see a decline in rate down to losing or completely not economical to keep producing it. So this process, like I mentioned, can be optimized using a analytics or a type of machine learning analytic that is called active learning. And then by implementing this in an edge device, it can be successfully monitored and updated remotely. So here's a quick overview, essentially, of the workflow here of the process, right? So you're taking criteria, or you're taking data from your SCADA system, and you're running it through the analytic to be able to identify whether the well is running under the optimal condition or not. If it is, it's optimized. If it's not, then the algorithm will search for the new set of optimal parameters that will ultimately provide a command to the automated control in the well side to adjust accordingly, right? So I won't bore you with these details here, but just jumping into the actual implementation. In this particular project, or in any kind of a machine learning approach, there's some training time that needs to be taken into account in order to be able to train the model using mainly historical data when it's available, right? That is the importance of why having digitized data for well site. It's a larger conversation, but at the end of the day, it is what actually will enable these kind of techniques down the road for anything that can be developed using this approach. So by training the model during a certain period of time, the model is able to identify the optimal set points and will produce that output to the controller inside to be able to run it multiple times and identify how it is actually happening. So it will take some time, depending on the experience or the available data. It will take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, especially to have a meaningful type of result in this particular case. What I would like to show you here essentially is just the progression of that training for that algorithm, which is the set or the baseline or the starting point. Essentially, it's important, and it's where the input from the experienced operator inside is really valuable, because you can start somewhere around what could be the optimal set point or the optimal production rate in this case, which is what we're trying to optimize, and then do the search around that to map all the potential reasonable set points. So that's what the algorithm it's being trained on, doing using field trials and real data from SCADA system that actually you're able to map. In this particular case, 18 cycles were used to train the model, and you can see that cycle number 17, which is highlighted by that small green circle in the bottom, essentially it's where it actually produced the largest amount of gas during that cycle, right? So with this training of the model, the algorithm is able to provide real-time set points to the automated valves in place, in location, to make sure that it's running under the optimal conditions. So what this actually enabled was not necessarily having to have people out there in the field doing these manual changes in set points, but actually being able to do it remotely. And then also by closely following real-time data, production data, and identifying a behavior associated with potential liquid loading, the algorithm was able to not only produce an increase in production, but also was able to reduce the manual unloading of wells by 94%, because at the point where you start seeing behaviors associated to liquid loading, it will actually shut in the well automatically and prevent the liquid to go into the wellbore, and thus avoiding to have to vent the gas down the road. So that is probably the main impact regarding ESG initiatives. On top of that, you will also have increased production throughout your producing life cycle. So that's essentially at a very high level what we would like to show you here today. I don't know if I have time for any more questions, but thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Santiago. Jake and Max, we probably have time for one question because we're going to fit in our
I got a quick one. So it seems like a massive addressable market, obviously, a ton of these older wells. A lot of these older wells are owned by smaller operators, maybe, not the bigger companies. The big companies have them too. How accessible would this be for those smaller operators that maybe don't have a lot of tech at their company, logistically getting it on there, and then without disclosing any specific pricing, just like cost and logistics, how accessible would this be?
Sure. So essentially, at the end of the day, this is not a significant investment in terms of hardware, right? Okay. It's not that significant. What's really significant here is the actual development of the algorithm and the analytics, right? So there will be significant markets for this, specifically, with where you mentioned on smaller operators. It will have to be something related to their actual financial, or the size of their operation, right? So the short answer to that, it's fairly accessible. It's not a significant investment required to implement this.
Okay. Cool. Interesting.
Awesome.
That's great.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here today. All right, and we have our final presenter, Forrest Hoagland with C1 Holdings. Let's welcome you to the stage, and then we'll tell you a little bit about C1, which was formed in 2004, and the company holds numerous global patents for compressed liquid technology, compressed gas liquid technology and related systems, and is developing various projects which leverage CGL technology to deliver lower emissions fuel and cleaner alternatives for power generation. So Forrest, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Well, we all know LNG. It's been a big part of our energy picture for a long time. It's been there about 60 years. Hadn't been any great improvement on it in all that time, but it's a massive thing, and it's very good, and these are just some of the numbers which I won't get into, but it's also massive in its size and all that, so surely there's some way of coming up with a better answer. Well, let me get it right here. Well, I'm missing it. Well, it's not there. Anyway, well, there is a better answer. And it's called CGL, compressed gas liquid. So it's a whole different way of being able to move natural gas and gas liquids together in a single cargo. And what it is, instead of having cryogenic temperatures and all that, you can do it with very normal kind of gas plant operating conditions of minus 40 degrees, 1,400 pounds pressure. So you save an awful lot of money in many of the aspects of LNG. Plus you only use 1/3 of the gas in actually forming the liquid. And that's a big benefit also, because that saves you a lot of emissions, as well as saving you a lot of money and a lot of gas that you can sell rather than just burn to make the product. So CGL is a game changer. If you look at LNG, you have to look at LNG and natural gas liquids. But the LNG, you start out, the first phase gets it to minus 40 degrees. Second phase gets to minus 150, and then you get it to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit to get the liquefaction of the gas. Then you can transport it at that minus 260 degrees. And then you also need moderate pressure and refrigeration as a separate thing for the liquids going forward. So on CGL, we put it all together. And all we need is basically a gas pipeline and a liquids pipeline coming into an export terminal. You mix them together at minus 40 degrees, 1,400 pounds pressure. It forms a liquid. In fact, it forms a liquid so good that the natural gas actually is absorbed in the liquids in the very same space. So it's very efficient in its ability to move forward. So the picture that you see then is that you've got a much less costly thing that you're talking about. And we have the complete ability to serve the customer whatever he wants. If he wants a high BTU gas, he can get that. If he wants propane, if he wants a butane propane mix, we can do that also. So I like to think of we're the Amazon of energy. You call us, tell us what you want, we deliver it. And there you have it. So the way it's done now, you need an export facility, and as I say, that's where you have the natural gas line and the liquids line coming in. You basically, all you have to do is build like a gas plant. It's really kind of a reverse gas plant. If you think what a gas plant normally does, it takes the wellhead, separates out the gas liquids and the natural gas. We just put it back together in one kind of very efficient manner of doing it. And then as soon as you make it, you store it in 42-inch pipe with a nitrogen blanket at minus 40, real easy to do, common that. Then you put it on a liquid gas carrier, as you see here. That's nothing but a floating ship with pipe in it, the same kind of pipe storage, 42-inch pipe. Nitrogen blanket, minus 40 degrees. You take it to the market. You can displace it out of the tanker into a basically same kind of storage of 42-inch pipe, but then you can move it into a fractionation plant to get you whatever product that you want and whatever product that the customer wants. So we have a project in Colombia. I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's pretty dramatic, the kind of changes you can make in the energy picture in the country, or some of the big projects. It is patented, protected all over the world. China, Russia, Europe, Canada, U.S. So we have complete control of the ability to take this new technology forward as a company. And we have a total of 9 U.S. patents, 84 international patents, a number of trademarks and all that. So we've worked hard to get those. Took us about 7 to 8 years to actually get the patents in there, but we have them. We're ready to move forward. tremendous number of businesses that can come out of this. Besides just transporting the liquids and the gas liquids, we can use it for ship bunkering, peaking service for gas utilities. You just have to build this gas plant with a storage, bring the gas in. If you're having a little cold spell like we had last winter, we could probably move 400 million a day back into the market that you brought slowly into your gas storage field. Moving stranded gas to market in offshore applications is probably the primary one that has tremendous benefit. Anyway, lots of ways that it can be used. In Colombia, we have a country that is short natural gas liquids, and power generation. We have a 30-year license on the West Coast energy port, Porto Solo. This is the only energy port on the West Coast. And we're permitted for 1.8 million barrels a day of hydrocarbons, including natural gas. Approved pipeline right away to Cali, which is only 40 miles away. It does go over a mountain or two, but anyway, there are pipelines. It has been done, so anyway. And we basically provide a virtual pipeline into the U.S. gas and gas market for them, which is a dedicated supply. The benefits, 50% reduction in fuel costs, dedicated supply, 66% reduction in emissions, a fixed transportation charge over time, doesn't go up, gets basically just like a U.S. pipeline fee. And you get the natural gas and the LPGs. This is a kind of an interesting project in Indonesia, the Abadi gas field. It's been designed to take gas to Japan. It's been held up because of the high costs. It's up to the range of $20 billion now, and they have it basically on hold to look at it. With you coming with CGL instead of LNG, we can save about $10 billion of the $20 billion. We can cut the emissions by 2/3. We can also get about an extra 4 to 5 trillion cubic feet of gas that we're not burning to make LNG, that we can make the CGL with, and we would have one of the lowest delivered costs to Japan. So anyway, it's here, the new industry standard for natural gas delivery. I personally think it's going to become an industry standard with time because it is so much simpler, cheaper, safer. Any way you go, it's better as a fuel and as a fuel source for these various countries. So it's been a great kind of a long struggle, fight. COVID hurt us like everybody else. But we are moving forward, and we think we have a tremendous answer for a big problem. Thank you.
Let's see, I grabbed the wrong note cards. Okay, thank you so much, Forrest. We appreciate it. Did y'all have a question for Forrest before we conclude?
I got one, real quick one.
Go ahead, I'll have a follow-on.
You go.
If I understand you correctly, you're able to use the CGL technology to distribute energy to either emerging markets or third world countries at a fraction of the costs while also lowering emissions. Is that correct?
Yeah, a fraction of the cost, yes.
Okay, absolutely. So that's big.
Actually, if you look at a standard 400 million a day plant, that's like 3 million tons a year for LNG. That plant would cost in the range of $2.5 to $3 billion for that. We can build the same size plant, but we only use about 10% of the acreage that you need because it's just a gas plant. We don't have all the other kind of things going. That's just enormous kind of a benefit from that standpoint. And our plant will only cost like $400 million instead of the $2.5 to $3 billion.
Wow, great.
That's it. That's all I
Okay,
got. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much, Forrest.
One thing, I have a fun business card. By the way, anybody that would like one, we came up with a whole new kind of deal, and it kind of...
Wow.
If you want to hear the full
innovation right
story
there.
of C1, there it is, and it'll have the kind of fun little things about it in there. So we have them over here at the table. Terry, my assistant, will be glad to give them out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Forrest. We appreciate it. Let's give everyone a big round of applause for presenting today. We really appreciated all of your technology and innovation. Okay, so now, audience, this is your time to shine. So if you'll look, we have everyone who presented today, and there's a number listed next to them. And so what you're gonna do is you're gonna text which number that's next to the presenter to the code 22333. Don't text the word code. That's very confusing. We tried it before, it doesn't work. So text the number next to the company that presented today that was your favorite right now. We'll give you a minute while you do that. So again, text the code. We've got different codes here for the companies that presented. We'll give everyone a few minutes, not really a few minutes, but a couple of minutes to present here right now. And I'll get the award while y'all are doing that. So again, text that number to the number next to the company to the number 22333. Okay. It's like watching horse racing right now. All right, the room is very quiet. I see people still texting, so we'll give everyone a minute. C1 Holdings. It's the first one. We had to do some switcheroo this morning. It's a technical term. Okay, get your last minute votes. I see people texting. I think we're done. Forrest, it looks like you're the winner. C1 Holdings is the audience favorite today. Thank you so much. Come up and get your award. Come on up. We got a little award for you. Audience favorite today.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
All right.
Awesome. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. All right. Next, we'll have Jake and Max come up, and they will present the Expert Panel Award for Most Innovative Technology. A little word for you.
So first off, every single one of these technologies is absolutely innovative, so not to take away anything from anybody. So first off, let's just give all the presenters kind of a round of applause.
Absolutely.
So we're asked to figure out who is the most innovative. I know a lot of you personally, so I'm going to look at it as I would look at the next chapter of my life, which would probably be a VC investing in companies like this. Where would we put our own personal money? So that was the question that we asked ourselves. So, Max?
Yeah, I think Caruso is who we had to go with. And the reason why I will say that is because it's the first time in really human history, if you think about the energy industry, it's very much always been a game of supply and demand. You know, how do you get energy supply to the demand source? And that is how you price energy. That is how energy moves. It really shapes our entire industry. So for the first time ever, we can now bring large-scale sources of demand directly to energy. And you can do it anywhere in the world remotely. And that actually kind of changes everything. And so it's sort of amazing. So I think that's why we had to go with it.
So Anna?
Awesome.
Get the sweet star.
Thank you so much, Anna. Appreciate it. All right, and now, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Let's give a hand to our panel today with great questions and commentary. Make sure you check out their podcast. They're really awesome and innovative, and I learned a lot while listening to them preparing for this event. So thank you for that. And now, the time has come for our winner of our door prize. So, Jamie, come on up with the prize. We'll get this going. Okay. We have a very awesome Yeti cooler. So wonderful. Okay. Yay, this is awesome door prize here. I'll hold, you can pick.
All right. All right, that's going to be 001-06143. Yeah.
No. James Labaugh, everybody. I can't believe it. There you go. Congratulations.
Great, congrats.
Awesome. Oh, this was not
Thank you.
authorized. Okay, thank you, Labaugh. Thanks, Jamie, appreciate it. All right, before we go, I've got one more thing to tell you about, and that is that we are hosting a new conference coming this spring called Energy Elevated. So please join us April 20th to 21st, 2022 for the Energy Elevated Conference and Expo in Austin, which will bring together the brightest minds from all over and showcase impressive technology and innovation like we saw today that are propelling us toward a cleaner energy future. So a variety of sponsorship opportunities are available, and pre-registration is open for those wanting to be a part of the event. You can go to www.energyelevatedconference.com to learn more. And thank you again to all of our presenters today and our expert panel. Please make sure you see me before you leave. We have a little thank you gift for everyone that came today, so thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came to our first TXOGA Technology Showcase. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.